Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Sheila, Signet's CEO. And tonight I have with me Andrea West, who is our Director of Operations. And she's one of our most senior academic coaches on staff. She'll tell you a little bit about what that means. But just so you know who you're talking to, we've been doing this a long time. We've, I think, seen every situation under the sun. And one of the things that we know from our years and years of experience is that there are a lot of emotions underlying the behaviors that we see in teenagers. I mean, they're underlying everybody's behaviors, even yours and mine right now. And if we can attune to those emotions, we will have an easier time not only communicating about the challenge, but actually starting to resolve it and move forward from there. So Andrea, I think, speaks so eloquently on this topic. And every time I'm, in my feelings about something, she really helps me get some clarity. So I'm really excited to introduce her to you tonight. And with that, I will just pass the mic to you, Andrea.
Oh, thank you, Sheila.
Yeah.
Um, Great. Well, as Sheila teed up, I work in the administrative office. Many of you, if you're a current Signet client, you've talked to me. Um, but what I get the privilege of also doing alongside the businessy work that I do is some academic coaching and some direct work with our students. It has been over 7 years of doing that, which Sheila reflected with me, and I was like, holy crap, where does time go? It's amazing. So I've gotten the opportunity to meet a lot of different kinds of kids, see a lot of different things, and work with my colleagues to watch things unfold over time with their students too. So what academic coaching is really is this kind of way of zooming out with our students to reflect on their academic life, right? Versus if they're working with a math or an English tutor, they're working on assignments, they're working on content, they're preparing for tests. When students work with me, they're talking about their habits overall. They're talking about some friction points in their life. We're talking and touching on grades sometimes, but it's really about this more habit-based, reflection-based practice. Um, so I'm pulling from that experience to share some things with you today. I do have a bit of an icebreaker, which is one I use constantly. And that is, we've got these 9 little cats on the screen here. And I'm curious if you can drop in the chat here, which one represents your student this academic year? I would love to get a view on how everybody's doing. What cat's facial expression reminds you of your kid right now? We'll give a second to do that. Or Langry. Yeah. I was gonna say, Sheila, you better answer
I
too.
have a
Yep.
4, yeah.
Yes. Lots of different feelings. I sometimes feel like number 6 this time of year, falling off of the chair because everything's so busy and chaotic. And you may even consider which one do you identify with? Because my hope is that the content that we're talking about today will give you some insight into your student and how to maybe address or think about their problems in a different way. But it might also unlock some stuff for you, because as Sheila said, like, what we're talking about is not school specific, but it is just the context we're starting from, right? I love these. We get some 4s, 5s, 7s, all over the place, these emotional cats. A great segue into saying that I believe school is a very emotional process. Now, I know I don't have to tell most parents this, right? Because their kid gets a grade that they don't like. It's a big emotional event. They're up stressed in the middle of the night working on something, a big emotional event. There is a fight between parents and students on what should be happening in the home. It's a big emotional event. And there are big highs, right? Good grades, great results, college acceptances. Oh my gosh, right? Our students are on this big emotional roller coaster all the time. And I think when students come to me for coaching, they're really in this mindset of like, the things I have to do are very structural. I need to follow this certain thing. I need to like just study for this test. And sometimes my job is to say, let's back up a little bit and understand what else is going on in your brain that might be kind of getting in your way from the kind of success that you want. And what even does that success look like? Because it's different for everyone. Oh, we put in yeah, that's how sometimes, especially in October, I think the school year feels. It's certainly how I'm feeling a little bit. Um, to start my kind of opening of this conversation with students, the older they are, the more cheeky I am about this. But I say, I think you're shoulding all over yourself. There is way too much should in this conversation that we're having, right? A student comes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, my like school life isn't going the way that I want." And I say, "Okay, well what changes do you want to make?" "Well, I should be going to bed earlier and I should be studying differently and I should be going to my teachers and like talking to them about this thing, but I'm not. And I should be responding to my emails and blah 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 blah." Right? And it's all coming out in that language, right? Now, in reality, like, should they be doing those things? Like, probably, right? But when that's all a student can see and talk from that place of should, all I hear from them is that we are starting from a place of shame. When you are in that mode of all these things that should be going differently, the emotional experience is quite negative, right? I am ashamed of what I'm doing. I'm getting all this input on how things should be going differently. What is wrong with me, right? Why can't I make these changes? Um, and I think even as adults, like we can relate to this feeling, right? You get that input, that should input all the time, right? It's and it's very rigid, right? It assumes there's one right way to do something, and if you're not doing it that way, the way that everybody else is supposedly doing it, there's something wrong with you. It doesn't consider like the context of your life, about what else is going on, about other, you know, ways that your brain might work or other things that you're balancing or other pieces to the puzzle. And it can always change, right? We're being told we should drink red wine one day and should not drink red wine the next year, and it's always changing because there's this element of like, if people are put in this position of feeling like they should or feeling like they're sitting in shame, that's also a great person to sell something to. And that to me comes up a lot too when we're talking about things like social media pressure, things that students are seeing online. They're getting targeted ads for that one planner that's going to solve all their problems. Should I buy this planner? I'm getting this thing, and everybody's buying this planner. I guess that'll solve my problem. But for any of us who have who've fallen victim to that shame spiral, right? How many notebooks have we bought that are not written in, right? They didn't actually help us because that response came totally out of that place of should. So the place that I most recommend my students start with is like, what happens if we take the word should out of vocabulary and start thinking about the changes you want to make, whatever those changes are, from a place of from an internal place versus this external place. Um, Sheila, I see you nodding along. Do you have any comments or are you just agreeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in. Sure. I can
Yeah,
talk about this all day long.
yeah,
I love that you went to it sells you things.
yeah.
Because yes, very literally it sells you things like the planner that comes up in your Instagram feed. But it also sells you lies, ideas, what you think are truths about what other people are doing or how easy it should be or not. It really convinces you that everybody else is right and you're wrong. So I like that language a lot because I think it's very descriptive and evocative of all this whole chain of things that come out of just thinking I should be doing this differently.
Yeah. Great. So then how do we move from this place of should to a more productive, in my opinion, place? The first thing that I have students do and that I encourage parents to do with their students is is really reflect on what's going on, right? Don't take anything that you've been hearing or that you've been saying for years to your student as truth and as you know that it's granted, right? What can you learn by stopping and reflecting about what your kid is doing right now? And one of my favorite things to explain to students and to parents is that the habits that they have now are serving them in some way. Even if you as a parent don't see it, even if you know that if they were doing the opposite thing, they would get this opposite result that isn't that much better. But change won't happen until we understand why we or our students are doing what they're doing. An example I like to share is that, like, yeah, a student might not be trying as hard as they could. They're not studying as much as they could. Their grades are fine. They're not taking honors classes. Parents are like, why? You are so smart. Why are you not pushing yourself? We should be doing more than what we're doing. Well, what that student is getting is like some kind of low expectations that are pretty easy to meet, right? If, well, I'm not going to expect A's from my student anymore because they're not trying that hard, then they're always going to meet that bar. They are getting the relief of that pressure that they might have otherwise felt if they were constantly stepping up to the plate, right? Um, so this is a place where I'm digging in with students, right? You're doing this habit that you don't want to be doing. Well, why not, right? And that's why I say if it were easy as just doing it, they would have done it, right? The cost benefit analysis to whatever they're doing now and whatever you're suggesting or that they even think that they want to do, something in the equation isn't working out, right? I think also about when students, they stay up too late and that they're going to be tired in the morning. Won't my kid just go to bed? Like they know that they're going to feel crappy in the morning. Why are they staying up? For some students who have a really overbooked schedule and that they're planned out all day and people are asking things of them all day, that couple hours that they're staying up is the only time where they get to really feel like themselves. They're getting an opportunity to be them. They're getting an opportunity not to have any pressure. They're getting an opportunity to maybe do something fun for themselves, like, play video games or stay up doing whatever. So the trade-off for them isn't worth it yet. And there's some balance there of being like, will it ever be worth it? And is this just something that we'll get into in my next slide, we'll work with and not against. But before we get there, I like to also throw out this reflection I encourage around my kid is in pain, they're stressed, they're suffering, whatever. And really digging into, is this suffering because this habit, we're going to talk about, my example is we'll talk about procrastination in a second, but whatever this habit is, they're in pain when they do it. So they should change this habit. Some reflection on, is it that habit causing the pain, or is it all of the should and the shame and the fight you guys have every single week and the, oh my gosh, I know I shouldn't be doing this. Oh my gosh, like I feel so guilty and so bad about what I'm doing, and that's causing the pain. And not if we just accepted things are going the way they're going, right? We can kind of pull apart and debate all sorts of things about like, well, what if this? What if that? But if you've never sat down and had that conversation or approach with curiosity your students, quote, bad habits, this is a place to start. It's a thought experiment that I like to encourage people to have. Sheila, any comments on this before we get into the example next?
No, but again, I love what you're saying here. If we can tease apart the emotions from the actual behavior, we might come up with a different solution. I think that's worth repeating.
So I have this image here of a salmon swimming upstream, because often that is what I feel as when I talk to parents, that's what I hear, right? That they're like, oh my gosh, I'm fighting a losing battle constantly, and I'm very tired of doing that with my kid. And again, the first thing that I might start with a parent or with a student who's fighting that upstream battle within themselves is, what if instead of fighting to change a bad habit that's you've been fighting for years, continuing to press on the same, well, I know we should be doing this differently. I want to do this differently. I want to see you do this differently. What would happen if we approach that problem with enough curiosity to work with it? What assumptions can we challenge, right? And I'll use this example of procrastination, and I'm a little bit like nervous about it, right? Because I don't want any parent to hear from me that I'm saying procrastination is great and like procrastination is not a problem and like let's just let kids do whatever they want. That is not what I'm saying, but it is a really powerful it's something that I know all parents can relate to, so it's a good place for me to kind of get my point across. But yeah, don't take this as indisputable. But in some students, right, they've been procrastinating for years and years and years. They always study the night before a test. Their parents, for years and years and years, have been like, that is bad. You should not do that. I know you're going to get a better grade if you start earlier. You're going to feel much better if you just prepared earlier for the test. I encourage, if that's you, to think about, is that actually true? Does your student actually feel better when they prepare earlier, when they are reviewing at the whatever cadence that you think is best for them? Or do they actually learn really well under some pressure? Is the knowing that the test is coming really soon, is that really motivating for them? Do they get a little bit of adrenaline? Does their brain work better the night before the test? And are they just feeling better preparing ahead of time because they're doing what you're saying? Because they're getting external praise from you, because you're saying, like, I finally did what my mom said. But if that really, really worked all the time and it worked with no resistance for them, that's already what they would be doing, right? So I'm kind of treading the line here between being like, let your kid do whatever, and like, yes, I know procrastination causes a lot of pain, but what if instead of just saying, well, this is the way the research says people learn, we said, let's research within our own child, right? What works for them and how can we work with the current, right? Maybe instead of saying, I hate when my student, you know, studies the day before every single time, we say, hey, kid, we know you're going to study the day before. Let's plan for it. Let's make sure that we don't have anything else going on. Let's make sure you don't go out with your friends. Let's make sure I don't pull you into some sort of family thing because we know you're going to study this day. And what if our goal is you just don't stay up all night, that you get a good night's sleep? How can we lean with what we know you're already doing and just make it less painful? Let's take out the shame, let's take out the should, and just see what happens. And that experiment might still lead you to the same conclusion that this didn't really work for my kid and the test was really hard. But you'd be surprised by just pulling out what you think is going to work and learning from what is already happening within your kid. A little bit of creativity can really add some smoothness into the process, right? So I say here, like, what new understanding can you arrive to? What happens when you put down your assumptions of like, this is exactly the way it should go because of X, Y, or Z reason? Um, so Sheila, I would love your thoughts on this one because I don't think you've heard me do this before.
I
If you,
haven't, no. And I
yeah.
love the disclaimer. We are not saying procrastination is like always good. But even as you walked us through that example, I felt my shoulders drop a little bit
Mhm,
when you said, well, we know you're just going to study the night before. Let's make sure we do it right. And I think so much, and even me, when I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, this kid's not studying until the night before,
mhm,
my fear is if you rush it, you're going to miss something. You're not going to learn it well. You're not going to have enough time to organize your notes. But if you are like, all right, they're not going to do it till the night before, but maybe we can make that study session the most effective thing possible. A lot of my anxiety about that just went out the window. And definitely will reduce the stress in the household, the tension in the relationship. And that's, a step in the right direction. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And to add to that too, when we're talking about students who have ADHD and neurodivergence, um, there's a term that goes around sometimes. It's like ADHD paralysis, right?
Yeah.
That it's like so overwhelmed with this feeling of, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. Like, I am the problem. I am shamed. I shouldn't have procrastinated. My mom has told me all, and like not being able to even do anything because they have been talking all week about my mom just told me I should have been studying and I haven't been, and now I'm here and I haven't started. And in my experience and talking to a lot of students, that's what takes up the time. That's what slows them down. It's not necessarily, caveat that there's a whole spectrum, right? It's not necessarily that they are so far behind that they can't possibly keep up. It's that the shame and the angst and the fighting takes up so much room that like they could probably get their work done pretty quickly. And in my experience, a lot of students with ADHD, once they can get past that, they can get stuff done a lot faster than a lot of other students. They are very good at being efficient. Um, And so I say all this just to say, what if we thought about this differently, right? And if the conclusion again is we tried this experiment and the test still went horribly and she was still very stressed and it was still not a great day in the household, then that's not the solution. There's something in the middle there. But I like to say I don't default vilify any habits, right? Well, within reason, right? But like any academic habits, I don't default vilify, right? There's no morality to them. Where can we find some creativity? I've got a couple more examples that I would like to share. And I call this like the should versus strategy comparison that I do with my students, right? They come in with a problem. I hear the shoulds coming out of their mouth. And then where do we end up? What actually works for this student, right? So I have this example of student Dylan who struggles with writer's block, right? Always sitting down to do work, really, really hates writing, can't stand it, sits down, has that kind of paralysis moment, and just can't write. Just can't write at all. Um, and I say, okay, Dylan, what's this? What are we gonna do? Like, how are we gonna kind of get through this? And Dylan says, well, I think what I should do is just try harder. Like sit there and think and force myself to stare at the computer. My teacher says I got to start with an introduction and write an outline, and I just have to sit and just grit my teeth until that happens. And I say to Dylan, sounds like you've been doing that your whole life. How has that worked for you so far? Well, it is stressful. It is anxiety provoking. It makes me want to walk away from the computer and not look back. And then I'm always rushing to get these papers done because I have this like panic every time I sit down. So, okay, we're not doing that then. We're going to try something different. And I arrived at this strategy with Dylan, which was we if what scares you, if what triggers this like panic feeling is sitting down and seeing a blank Google Doc open, how could we make that Google Doc not blank, right? I say, sit down and write something. Doesn't even have to be relevant. Write about how you're feeling, write a journal entry, write about what you did today, and just keep going until you are ready to transition into talking about what this paper is actually about, right? And it is really impressive to me to see that that actually works, right? Once the typing has just begun and the page is not blank and there are sentences on the screen and Dylan doesn't feel like he has to pull everything out of his brain all at once, the emotions have kind of passed and we can get some work done. You, of course, got to go back and delete it later and make sure that that's a step in your process, but it's so much more effective than saying, Dylan, sit down and write your paper, right? So much angst in that, right? And this is a good place to insert, something that I noticed too is like, especially with our kind of anxious students and students who tend to overwork and are a kind of, we think more at risk for burnout, this feeling that like the harder it is, the harder I'm working. Like work is struggle and pain and strife. Like if I am sitting here pulling my hair out for hours, then I can say, oh yeah, I studied for 3 hours. Did you really? Or did you just have a spiral for 2.5 hours and you did maybe 30 minutes of work? But I think about students, especially at hyper competitive high schools, which I know a lot of your students come from, that whirlpool, man, of saying, that student who panics doing 3 hours of work would never admit she only needed to study for a half an hour because she's that smart. Because everybody else is saying, I studied for 3 hours. Well, I studied for 4 hours. So you should be studying for that many hours, right? I like to say it's not better studying because it's more painful or more grueling. And if we can get this stuff to be as efficient and easy as possible, if you can look at your work for 30 minutes and get a grade that you're happy with, heck yeah, I'm going to tell you to do that. So Sheila, I know that's something that you and I like to talk about in terms of, adult working too, like days and
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think about like where did these attitudes come from? And
Yeah.
I know as a child of the 80s, I was, raised on the American dream and no pain, no gain, and all of these things. And there are times where I'm like, wait, did I really do a full day's work? Because I'm not exhausted. I'm not like picking myself up off the floor. But isn't that the goal? We want things to be easy. Not that we're not reaching our potential or exerting ourselves or learning, but rather it doesn't have to feel like, a battle to the death in order to get something done,
Yeah,
in order to feel like, okay, yeah, I learned that well. I did what I'm supposed to do. I did enough to get, like you said, the grade that I want. Um, and I think calibrating that is really important.
great. I've got one more example here that I like, and it comes up in webinars all the time. So some of you might have heard this one already. Um, so we tell this story a lot about a student who could not wake up on time. Like waking up in the morning was the thing that she and her coach were working on, right? Everything else trickled out from it. She couldn't wake up on time. She was late for school. She was flustered. She'd forget things. So much falls out from that. So, there was an understanding that, like, yes, this was something that really needed to change in order for her academic life to feel easier. Um, Talk to the student about what could we do to work on this habit or this problem. And we could think about things like, well, let's have your mom come in and crash cymbals and rip your covers off of you so you can't possibly fall back asleep. Let's buy you the most annoying alarm clock in the entire world. You can, look that up on Amazon. There's 100,000 different options. um, and you can force yourself, if you just force yourself to go to bed earlier, maybe waking up wouldn't be so hard, right? You can hear in all those solutions that might first come to mind so much shame, so much angst, starting the day with a fight with mom, right? Pulling the covers off of you. These things were not going to work for the student. So it took a while to kind of troubleshoot and understand what's something that might work. Um, and I love this. This wasn't my student, but I love this solution that they came up with, that like the student was struggling, like not really having much to like look forward to in the day and in life, and school was very stressful and everything was very stressful, and how could you possibly wake up all chipper in the morning when you knew you had a lot kind of going on. So she and her coach came up with the agreement, just like, let's make the morning as special and exciting as possible. The student really like benefited from like new and exciting, like novelty things to look forward to, not uncommon with students with ADHD. So they ultimately decided to get an automatic coffee maker that she could put by her bed, and it went off on a timer. And so then she woke up earlier than she needed to, so she could smell the coffee and drink coffee in bed before getting up, right? She needed something exciting in her life. And then all of a sudden, mornings became that for her. So that's such a classic Signet example, but it's so perfect. It is so good to consider how the first instinct or the things that they've tried or the stuff based in shame did nothing for this student. And it just pushed it farther into, like, pushed that habit deeper into the brain, I feel like, versus kind of shaking it up and doing something different really helped. Um, so there's lots more examples like this, but I encourage you, if there's a particular thing that your student is struggling with, or a conversation you've had a bazillion times, or anything like that, what would it be like for you as a parent to go through this process, right? To move from should to a strategy, to try something different, and to learn from your kid because they are an expert in them, right? I say a lot when folks might get caught up in the research, or when I read this study and this is what they say. It's like, yes, that is true on the population, but have you done as much research into the person, into your kid, into what their experience is, into their internal life? Um, and that is such a much more enriching thing for a parent and student to do, instead of, did you do your homework? Did you do your homework? Did I know you got to do your homework, right? Which I know none of you like to do. Um, there's of course a balance. I don't think this is I'm not advocating for a pendulum to swing all the way, but just experimenting with what it's like to pull back a little bit into that mode, I think unlocks a lot of things, both for students within themselves. This is the internal work that I do with my kids, my Signet kids, um, and what can happen in the relationship between parent and student. Let's see. Oh, I'm going backwards. Canva. Come on. Sorry about that. The last thing, kind of top concept that I think relates here is that this kind of reflective process is certainly not a one and done. It might be for like certain problems or habits or things we experiment with, but this whole skill set of learning oneself, trying things, getting feedback, trial and error, pushing past the shame, I think for most students has to happen at many levels, right? It happens on the kind of daily basis. It happens in the study session that they're having themselves. That's kind of like what we're talking about. But I also like to encourage that reflection um, on the week, on the semester, sometimes even on the year. If you want to get existential, we can talk about the lifetime. But I think all students benefit from learning this skill at least these lenses here, semester, weekly, daily within the session, right? Um, some students might be way more comfortable in the moment. They really know how to write. They really know how to study for an exam. You pull them out of that onto the semester and say, what are your goals for the semester? And they have no idea. Some students are really good at dreaming, being creative, having some hopes for themselves, coming up with all of these things they want to do. And then you get into the daily to-do list and the execution, and that's really hard for them. So I'm saying all this to say this skill has to happen at these different levels to really get a sense of a kind of a healthy and smooth academic life. Um, I think about, the lenses on a camera, right? When you're zooming in, is that zooming in and out process really smooth and comfortable? Does it get stuck? Are you clunky? Where are we finding those stopping points? And at those different levels is where the concept of like a routine or a structure or a process that you can follow might come into place, right? I have reflection processes with my students on how to wrap up and start a semester, on how to plan out and reflect on a week, on how to clear out the to-dos of a day, and how to kind of structure a study session itself. So then, what I like to say, I like this word academic health, right? It's a little like, I don't know, woo-woo, if you will, but like feeling healthy, strong, confident in academics is a combination of this reflection skill that we've been talking about this whole time and the systems in place to keep that reflection running throughout a year, right? Um, and I know we're going to be sending around some examples of some of these tools and structures that students and parents can run on these different levels. But I like to kind of send all of those off with the caveat that they are examples, right? If you take anything away from what I've talked about today, is that the solution, I believe, as my philosophy is not just in here's this worksheet that you're going to do every week and your problems are going to be solved. It is what do you, individual human being, need to do every week in order to feel in control, smooth, and confident. So what we'll send around are some examples of what you can use. But I encourage you to, if this is really resonating with you, to talk to your student about what they think they actually need to do in order to have regular connection with themselves and with school to really feel strong and healthy in their academics. Um, so with that, that's about all I have to say. We have plenty of we doing on time. Talked for longer than I thought. That's great. So we have plenty room um, for questions. We've got some QR codes on the screen here. If Sheila, you want to talk about what these actually do.
Yeah. Now, since you all registered for this webinar, you're going to get this email follow-up and the resources that Andrea was talking about. So you don't need to scan that QR code at all.
Okay.
But if you would like to talk to someone at Signet, even Andrea herself, about what coaching might look like for your child, if you feel like, I mean, I know this, like I don't coach because I know that I do not have the patience to leave the shoulds out of the room. I'm very impatient. I'm very like, let's just get this done, do it this way. But of course, all of our academic coaches are much more like Andrea, who really hold this wonderful space without judgment for students to allow them to be creative and come up with solutions. So if you feel like this is not something I can do with my kid. I've tried it, it's not working, or I don't have the time or knowledge to do this, just book a call. You'll talk to either Andrea or our account manager, Emmeline, who happens to also be an expert in executive functions and learning differences. And you can hear about what coaching might actually look like for your child, and what kind of cadence, and what does an actual session look like. So that's that second QR code there to
Yeah,
book a
I would
call.
say if you're already a client with us, you probably already know me, so you can come right to my inbox if you want to talk if your student's already working with Signet. But if you've not yet gotten started with Signet and you're interested in it, you'll talk with Emmeline and book that call.
Yeah.
Good. I'll stop my screen share. I did not see any questions pop up in the chat, which is a good thing because I'm terrible at managing the chat, but I see
Oh, we
this
got a
pop
long
up,
one here. It just
Jennifer.
popped
Yeah.
in. Jennifer was typing for a while, I think.
Yeah.
I'll ask the question, and then, everybody else, feel free to drop your
Yeah.
questions in the chat or come off of mute. But Jennifer asked, what strategy might work for a student who perpetually waits to start homework until late at night? She tends to come home and waste time on her phone until 9 o'clock, which leads to not finishing until after midnight, which then leads to heightened emotion and not getting enough sleep, which negatively affects her mood and becomes a downward spiral of sleep deprivation and unhappiness. I don't know how to help her start homework earlier and break the cycle. What a great question, Jennifer. And I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that.
Yes, but certainly not alone in that experience
Right.
either. So I think I would be curious. Have you ever, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but like, have you ever asked her like why? Like, why doesn't she start earlier, and why does it take her until midnight to get started, or 9 o'clock?
I have asked her that, and sometimes, so I get a variety of answers. One
Yeah,
answer is, well, I need a break. And
yeah,
to be fair, she's at school all day, she's at extracurricular activities. Yes, she needs a break, but probably not a 3 hour break. And so then I ask her, okay, so take a break, but then why don't why aren't you starting? And she'll say, I know I should. And she goes right back to her phone. I think some of the better answers that I've gotten from her is she feels overwhelmed and she doesn't know where to start. And so
mm,
she just avoids starting, which I think makes it a bigger elephant than it really needs to be.
yeah, yeah. So there are two things that if your student was working with me, if I had them in front of me, there's a couple of things I would want to do. I would say, okay, you need a break. So does everybody else. I totally agree. How can we make sure that that break is actually a break? It's actually restorative to you, and it's not 2 hours of dissociating on the phone and kind of like feeling bad and knowing that homework is coming, right? I think a lot of students say that they, oh, I took a break. And what they actually did during that time is just like, I know I have to start. I know I have to start. I really don't want to start. I really don't want. This is terrible. I'm gonna like look at my phone. I'm gonna distract myself. Like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Right. How can we have a break that's actually restorative? What's something that we can do that's really going to actually refresh you and like wash your brain out a little bit? Because it's probably not TikTok, probably not as much as, I think even as adults, like we get trapped into that. Like it doesn't actually refresh. So I would say, what's a way that we can actually make sure that you're refreshed, and how will we know that that happened? So that homework starts with a clear mind and it's not starting out of angst, right? And then I love what you pointed out that like it's that like not knowing where to start, like blank stare paralysis. That is truly the reason why I believe a lot of students have trouble with this, right? It is not that it's not that they're being lazy, right? Most cases, I think, of course, there are some lazy students, but like what can we organize to make starting not so terrible? Like, what's a ritual that we can start that says, okay, if we can get you through the first 5 minutes, this is going to be like, we know it's going to be better. Like, what can we decorate like a corner of your room? And like, you start in that corner, and the first thing you do is like, turn on this light that you really like that makes you feel good. Like, how can we make that first 5 minutes tolerable? How can we no, how can we, if we want to get a little bit more like um traditional, like how can we make a plan that doesn't stress you out, right? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to journal for 5 minutes about what you learned today, or journal for 5 minutes about what you don't know on this test yet, something like that. So I would be just trying to shake things up in her emotional experience of coming home from school. Um, does that resonate? What do you think when I say all these things?
I think it's a great place to start, and I am absolutely looking forward to trying some of these things, and we'll have to see what actually comes out of that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I say with this stuff too, is that unfortunately, because it's so customized, it is trial and error. Like some things are going to work and some things are not going to work. But when you're able to engage the students with, okay, that did not work. You still stayed up all night. What do you make of that? Like, what are we trying next? Or, whoa, that changed everything all of a sudden. What I had no idea that was going to happen. Like, what do you think unlocked for you? Like, what happened this time around that was different? And the more practice students can get with that, they can start doing it by themselves. And then that's how I think we create more successful, calmer, resilient college students and adults, right? That when something's really like not going well, they've been through this process enough that they don't need somebody else intervening. That's kind of the ultimate dream of all of this stuff. Um, Sheila, I'm curious if you would say anything differently.
Um, I no, I think you did answer. I mean, you said basically everything that I would say, but I think one thing that I want to stress is the thing about trial and error. It is a process. And I think too often we get disappointed if the first thing we try doesn't really work. And that's probably a little bit of what's happening for your daughter as well. She's tried starting homework, and that one time she tried it, it didn't go well. And so she's decided, that's not going to work for me, right? But one of the things that we want to teach them is that kind of like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, even if you tried something and it didn't completely solve the problem, was there anything good about it that you should hold on to and we should keep in whatever we experiment with next? And what was not working about it, we're definitely going to find a replacement for that part of the solution. And that way you're not just starting from zero every time. And they realize that there is value in practicing it and doing it over and over again and building that muscle that Andrew was talking about. And I think about that with writing too. I always tell my students, I do a lot of college admissions coaching. I always tell my students, your first words are the worst words. That doesn't mean they don't deserve a spot on the page. It's where we start, and they are going to be the worst because we are going to revise them and we are going to make them better. And we're going to make sure they're saying exactly what you want them to say in exactly the right language and structure and all of that stuff. But the first time you say it, it's probably not going to sound all that special. And that's totally fine. That's actually what you're aiming for. So sometimes the bar, they've set the kind of bar for themselves a little too high. And we want to keep that bar really low so that they can get over the hump and get started and see the positives that come out of that. And then eventually it will snowball.
Great. Quick follow-up question.
Mhm.
How long should we try something different before we say that didn't work, we're going to try something different? Do you try it one night and it doesn't work, and so then you try something different the next night? Or do you try for a few nights before you say, okay, this isn't working, we need to try something different?
Good question, because I have the benefit, right, in my coaching that I see my students once a week, right? So I know, okay, these are the things we're going to try for the week. I'm going to see you on this date and like, let's iterate and let's learn. So if I'm thinking from the perspective, your perspective here, I think there's probably like a little bit to learn every time you do it. And I would I would practice with trusting the student to say like, should we do something different or do you want to go at this again? Like, what are you changing? What did you learn? Is there something new we can pull from it? Um, I know that's a bit of an unsatisfying response, but I think if we're underlining anything, it's like what works is what really comes from the student, and that is so frustrating sometimes because we just want to be able to be like, here's your plan. I downloaded it from the internet to like just do this thing. But there's a reason why we're all here, right? There's a reason why so many students struggle with this. And I think getting your students to try and practice taking the lead is what's going to get success across the board. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you, Jennifer, but that's what my instinct is telling me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was a great question. I would say the same thing. I would say at least try it more than once.
Yeah.
Like at minimum, try it more than once. But it's not like you have to do it for 3 weeks. You have to do it for 1 week before you move on. If it's really not working, it's not
Mhm.
working. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great
Thanks for
question.
such a wonderful question. I'm sure most people watching this are going to relate to that. It was wonderful.
Gina says she's got a child in a similar boat. Gina, is there any like variation on this that you'd like to ask about? Or of course, anybody else with questions?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the
Mm,
same situation.
mhm.
So I'll just have to, I mean, I like what I'm hearing. I think I am a little bit too judgy, and I think I have the answers. So I liked what Andrea said about, just trying to embrace that he's going to start a little late and see what we can do to make it positive. And then if we continue to fail, maybe there'll be a little more self-acceptance that this
Yeah.
isn't working, right? So we'll see.
And sometimes that's an important part of the process. There needs to be a consequence
Yes.
Yeah.
to the behavior that needs to change for them to see, oh, I really need to change this.
Mhm.
And yes, some students are in a little bit of denial, like it's
Yeah.
fine, I'm gonna be fine, I'm gonna, pull out all the stops and we'll get 100 on the test or whatever. But you can make agreements with your child to say, all right, you try it your way. And if this is the kind of result, then you have to agree to at least try it once another way or my way or whatever the agreement's going to be.
Yeah.
Because, all of this starts with the student's buy-in, right? Like
Mhm.
they're not even coming to a session with Andrea unless they're like, I'm in pain and I need some help. Somebody needs
Right.
to help me change something. If they're like, I don't need help, I'm going to do it on my own, leave me alone. It doesn't matter how kind and gentle Andrea is, it's not getting through. And even if they come to a solution, the student may not stick with it out of spite. Right.
Right.
So we really need to make sure the students are bought in. And then sometimes that means facing a little bit of those
Yeah.
consequences.
And I love the idea of the consequence being, the grade or the stress level in school or the like confusion on the topic. And the consequence is not a fight with mom or a a breakdown about how stupid I am, right? And often that's the pain point to start with that students might be starting with. And I would love when we can get those consequences to be external, there's actually a lot more, like a lot more you can do. There's a lot more openness to change. Because yeah, sometimes I feel like my biggest goal as a coach to allow parents and kids to talk about things other than school and grades and homework and when you go into bed. Um, Shift that kind of awareness onto the student themselves is like the biggest success that I could ask for.
May I add in something, an idea or two for Jennifer, uh, or anyone? I know for myself, it helps a lot if I have a physical thing that I do with the task that I need to do before I run off onto a device or a computer. Even if the device or computer has nothing to do with the task, if I start with intentionality and I own sort of my workspace and my work agenda, um, uh, it's very helpful. Even though sometimes, yes, there's doom scrolling that happens and things don't get done as effectively as they should. It really helps because it gives you a sense of ownership. So it's possible that if you have a certain space in her room or off in a study room or outside on a deck in a very pleasant area where they you set out some kind of physical sign to yourself that you're going to be doing, okay, I have these 4 assignments that have to get done. and just some kind of physical sign, like a piece of paper for the math assignment, a piece of paper for the science, a piece of paper for the geography, or the textbook associated with it, or even just it writes right out, there will be 3 questions that I have to answer. Some
Yeah.
physical sign of what you intend to do before you get onto the phone. And start, with more of a break. Sometimes that helps you come back and start more easily because you started from a place of ownership and intentionality. And there's a physical symbol to you sitting on your desk or wherever your hallowed workspace is.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that sounds exactly, maybe I'll bring that up to some students this week. That sounds exactly like the sort of thing that a student and I might come to. And I love that you're sharing, and I appreciate you sharing that that's something that you do in your like adult life, right? This
Right.
is not a concept that's limited to students and teenagers. Like the more coaching I do, the more like, I don't know, I want to say like weird stuff that I do in my own life to make it run smoother and more efficient and work for me. It's like a really powerful tool.
And the other thing I really loved about what you shared, Sue, is that it's so great to be able to model this for students
Mhm.
so that they know it's not just you're struggling with this because you're a teenager. Everybody struggles with these things. It's why adults are obsessed with like life hacks and technology and like, all of the things that we can use to make work easier and more organized. And when you can share both that you've struggled with something and how you figured out the thing that worked for you. Maybe even that, oh, my colleague uses this tool and I tried it and I hated it, but I found this other thing that really worked for me. Just for them to understand that this is a process and it is one by which you're going to come to an individual solution that's going to work for you, might not work for me. Right. And we all, come to these things at some point in our lives. But they weren't handed to us and they didn't come out of thin air. And our kids need to know that too.
And another thing that helps it helps you enter the process with a vision of her actually doing the homework and what it's going to look like when it's done. And
Yeah.
that way, should I don't know about her, but I know about me. I would be less scared getting back into it, even if I doom scroll for 2 hours accidentally instead of 20 minutes.
Mhm.
It's easier to come back because I had a vision that I had in my own head that I can come back to.
I use that word vision a lot
Yeah,
in my day
it
practice.
really helps. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's
And
really beautiful.
I wanted to mention another thing that it helps another friend. I've never done it myself, but uh, 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 physical things that you can do either in addition or instead of doom scrolling, like she sings
Mm.
to sort of bebop songs, and I think the kind of songs that you kind of sing and dance to at the same time. Um, and for her, singing really makes a difference. So there might be some kind of physical thing or, something in addition to uh, doom scrolling that kind of helps.
Yeah.
If you
I
think
have
about it, singing, gets oxygen to your brain and you kind of enjoy it and maybe enjoy it with other people in your family or enjoy it with the person on YouTube that you're singing it with, or whatever it is. So it has a lot of different aspects to it that sometimes refresh you more than doom scrolling.
I uh I have a I have a student whose like homework assignment for a while was like, you can't start your homework until you've had a dance party to at least one song. Like, because she reflected like, I just come home and I have so much energy, and she's like, get really distracted and all over the place. And I'm like, what? Let's burn a little energy and then see what your focus is like. And I was like, when you get home, have a dance party and then tell me how you felt when you started your homework after. And it worked. It really did. That's a lot more fun than just saying, well, you have to. You should be
Right,
focusing. You know,
right.
what a
Well,
cool.
we are almost out of time. Are there any last questions before we sign off? All right. Well, you have my email address. You can find our information on our website as well, and we'll send around the recording and those resources. And I hope you all find this helpful. I know most of our students have just kind of gotten through midterm season, and we're maybe breathing a little bit easier now, but we are coming up on finals and all the other things. And I know we've got early college deadlines next week. So everyone here at Signet is running around with our heads cut off almost. But please reach out if you need some help or if you have additional questions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sheila. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you,
so
Andrea.
much.
All right.
Thank you. This was so helpful.
Bye,
Oh,
everyone.
I'm so happy to hear that. All right. Bye, everyone.